Best Book Bits brings you Tom Butler-Bowdon, the man behind the 50 Classic series with 9 books in his collection, ranking in order from 2003, 50 Self-Help Classics, 2004, 50 Success Classics, 50 Spiritual Classics, 50 Psychology Classics, 50 Prosperity Classics, 50 Philosophy Classics, 50 Politics Classics, 50 Economics Classics, and 50 Business Classics. And my current favourite right now, Never Too Late to Be Great, translated into 23 languages, a true scholar, an Australian native. Tom, thanks for being on the show.
Great to be with you, Michael.
No worries. And for those who don't know Tom Butler-Bowdon, where did it all start? Tell us a little bit about how it all started for you.
As you said, I grew up in Australia, from Adelaide, then I moved to Sydney. I went to uni there and worked in the government there, advising ministers and so on. And when I was doing that job, I had to summarise sort of complex issues for ministers down onto one page for cabinet meetings and so on. So I developed a bit of a skill there in summarising analysis. And at the same time, I was getting very interested in the whole personal development literature, reading, Anthony Robbins, Stephen Covey, and all of that, getting heavily into that. So I guess I reached a bit of a career crossroads, continue in the sort of political path I was on, or get further into personal development. So I started writing a lot of notes on all these sort of classic self-help books, motivational. And that just sort of became a book. I had so many notes. And so over, I guess, 3 or 4 years, I transitioned from my old career into becoming a writer, and initially focused very much on personal development. And then as that classic series grew, covering other areas, such as philosophy, politics, economics, psychology.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think you wrote your first book in 2001 in Australia, and then you internationally published it in 2003. What was the experience like with the first book? Obviously, you summarised 50 self-help classics, and I have to confess to people watching, I'm actually a massive fanboy. You're one of the first books I actually ever read, and one of the reasons I actually started Best Book Bits behind me. I've summarised 700 books myself, and I'm sure you probably exceeded that number with the book summarised, but I just want to say thank you for the bottom of my heart for actually doing all this series, and fantastic book. So tell us a little bit about the process with the first book. I think you wrote it in the Outback, is that correct, in Australia, or researched it?
Oh yeah, I did some writing there. That's right. I guess wanted to clear my head because I've been in the UK for a couple of years studying. Came back to Australia, was heavily into this literature, and then sort of wanted to work out what I could actually do with it. Because you have to remember, at the time, self-help was a bit of an underrated genre in the early 2000s. Now it's like everyone totally takes it for granted. But at the time, it was considered a bit sort of lowbrow, and no one would touch it in a sort of serious way. So what I wanted to do was create what I thought would be the first guide to that whole literature. So I do one chapter on each, what I felt was a classic, popular book in the genre, and then put it together in the end as like 50 books, so the 50 self-help classics. I love writing it. I didn't find it that difficult, because I'd written a fair amount of stuff before. So the whole process of writing my first book came relatively easy. Found a publisher easily, and then it got published in the UK as well, and then the States, and has done pretty well. So that was sort of a fortunate foundation to my writing career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe so some of the books that you and the authors you translated as well, which was amazing. You studied sort of government and history. What sort of led you to personal development? And then you went to the UK, and I think you studied at Oxford with an international political economics or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, London School of Economics. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. I was very into politics, history, economics, etc. Um, but same time I was quite into personal development, and I guess I think of the Samuel Smiles who wrote the original book titled Self-Help in 1859, and he was sort of a political journalist, crusading journo, and then but he slowly got interested in the sort of uh, success of people living in his time. Like, how did they succeed? What did they have to do? Um, how did they sort of arrive at their epiphanies and breakthroughs, etc.? So, and then so he also shifted from, like, the political to the personal. So I guess I sort of went on that same path, um, and uh, he had this saying that nothing really changes unless the person changes. So the big revolutions in the world happen inside people's heads. So that resonated with me, and even now I think you can't really change stuff politically, and culture, society, unless people change. So really, at the end of the day, I felt that personal change was more important as the sort of first level of things, before politics or culture. So that's why I decided to focus on that, and leave the political career behind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess after your first book, you actually won the US Benjamin Franklin Award in 2004. So congratulations for that. That must have been a sort of huge honor.
Yeah, that was great. Started to get recognition for these books. Yeah, after the self-help classics, I did the success classics and the spiritual classics, and then psychology. Yeah, so they're all selling. They're all out there still, selling, because they're sort of a reference work. They're sort of a bit beyond fad and fashion, although I do update them. So yeah, it was nice to get recognition, and also of the fact that this genre, motivation, success, self-help, was a real genre, and it was worth getting respect, from a critical perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually wrote a similar book that you did in 2004, which was 50 Success Classics. So I did Success in 50 Steps. So a very similar title. But yeah, I did 500 books condensed down into one book. Now, what is the difference, you think, between self help and success? I know it's a similar authors and similar books in there as well, but what's your definition of the differences?
Yeah, self-help is really about trying to improve yourself, as in your relationships, your happiness, your levels of happiness, your levels of well-being. Not necessarily anything to do with worldly success, but success, in my view, is about worldly success. So you want to translate your personal happiness and well-being, to your work, to your level of finances, etc., to your social recognition. So I don't think one is good and the other is bad. We both want, all of us want both, happiness and well-being. We also want success in the world as well. So I just wrote two different books to cover the two different things. Um, and I mean, it's a question of whether what the sort of relationship is between them, whether you can be successful in the world and not happy, or you can be happy and unsuccessful, if that's possible. I guess that's more of a philosophical question, but that is my basic divide, in the literature, and also philosophically.
Yeah, perfect. And then your next book, you tackled the spirituality side, the 50 spiritual classics. What was that like researching that? And are you whereabouts do you sort of sit in the religion slash spiritual realm yourself?
Yeah, that was an amazing experience writing that book. I mean, I covered everything, from the Bible to Buddhism, right up to books like The Power of Now and The Purpose-Driven Life. So I wouldn't recommend reading those 50 books in the space of a year like I did. It was a bit of a mind spin.
Yeah, yeah,
But I learned a huge amount, as I've done with all these books. Yeah, religion, spirituality. I think it's really important that people have some sort of understanding of power beyond themselves, if only for their sake of mental health. Because if everything comes down to you and your personality and your ego, it's easy to take everything personally, and you can seesaw in terms of success or failure. But if you can sort of put a lot of that onto something else, whether you call it infinite intelligence or God or something else, you do become, happier, and also you feel like you have a larger purpose, in terms of your place in the universe. So when I went along that path, it did make me happier and more purposeful. It's like Freud said, the ego, the id, and the superego. There's these three elements that you need to balance to have a happy, successful life.
yeah. And I think that's a good segue. Actually, the next book was 50 Psychology Classics. I was just trying to go through them to understand. You tackle one massive subject, and then you're like, okay, I've done that. What's the next one I have to jump onto? And then it's the Psychology Classics. So again, that would have been some heavy books you had to go through yourself.
Yeah, everything from the sort of pioneers of psychology, like Freud and Jung, up to more recent psychology, bestsellers, classics. Because what I realized was that over a 15-year period, the people who are reading like self-help motivational books started to get into more popular psychology because it was more rigorous, grounded in studies, etc. So now the same person who might, who 15 years ago might have just read Anthony Robbins or Stephen Covey, now they're reading books like Thinking Fast and Slow and Paradox of Choice and a whole bunch of popular psychology because they're considered to be more, better grounded. So I thought if I was going to stay in this whole area of personal development, I had to move with the times and cover psychology both as a discipline and as a popular genre that it was becoming. That the sort of the bar had been raised in personal development, and psychology was becoming a very important part of that. You think of like Adam Grant today; he's got millions of Instagram, Twitter followers, organizational psychologist. So, people like him have replaced the sort of old school motivational speakers.
Yeah, and then you jumped on to 50 Prosperity Classics 1 year later, and then took a 4 year break to write the next book, or did you was there a time when you stopped writing and researching and lived a little bit? What else is sort of you do apart from researching, writing, and spending all your days at that fantastic library in Oxford, which we'll talk about later? What else do you get up to apart from reading and writing?
Yeah, well, I sort of got, after doing 5 books or something, reading, as you would know, if you were doing only summarizing your books every day, for several years, it's so many ideas in your head and so much work. So I did take a bit of a break, and that's when I wrote the other book, The Never Too Late to Be Great, which was sort of my...
Yeah, I think we've both got a copy here.
Yeah, that was the later version. So really what that book came out of was I had covered, every possible idea in psychology, personal development, success, and I just felt there was something lacking in the whole literature. So that was my book. I wanted to fill the gap. And the missing link for me was time. That personal development hadn't taken enough account of time and the time it takes to achieve things. So that's what I wanted to do with that book.
Yeah, it was a fantastic book, and I'm just going to read a quick little intro of it, if you don't mind, so the people listening. So, Never Too Late to Be Great, The Power of Thinking Long. It's about the power of thinking long, exposing the myth of overnight success. Contrary to popular belief, people, companies, products, and ideas inevitably need a long time to realise their potential. You talk about the 10-year rule that Malcolm Gladwell touches on, and that life begins at 40. And I think you might have been around that sort of age. Was that correct when you sort of wrote that book? And am I right?
Yeah, roughly, exactly. So I was partly writing it for myself. um, but the larger
Yeah, I understand. We all write books for ourselves. Yeah.
the larger context was that obviously people were living longer lives, greater longevity. So even though success takes longer than we think to achieve, as you've said, our time frames for achieving stuff are actually much longer. If you've got a productive lifespan of now 70, 80 years, it means that, when you're 40, you've got decades ahead of you still, in which to achieve stuff, rather than the old idea of, when you're 60, 65, that's it. So I wanted to give people, I guess, heart or reassurance that if they hadn't achieved what they wanted by a certain age, and I give tons of examples in the book, as you know, of people who sort of succeeded a bit later, to give people reassurance that actually they had a lot more time than they thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually about to release a 20-page summary on this book. It was one of the best books I've read this year. It goes through things like slow cook success. So you want to touch on that? I mean, going through your 20s and 30s and laying the foundational periods to when you hit 40, and then you start really taking off. Some really great examples in the books. But what's your take on slow cook success?
What I meant by that was our society is totally geared towards overnight success and achieving things quickly. You think of like the Mark Zuckerberg type of person who creates a platform very quickly, it's successful, and he's a billionaire. But they are really the sort of rare exception. For 99% of people, things take decades. Bill Gates said people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in a decade. And I think that's absolutely true. And I'd even go so far as saying, give yourself a 20-year time span, and you'll achieve even, incredibly more than what you expect. So it's just this thing of giving yourself a bit more time, and also respecting the experiences that you've had in the past, which brick by brick have made you the person that you are now. Like I mentioned my career in government and so on, and writing briefing notes, and at the time I didn't think, if I changed career to personal development or something, I would sort of leave all that behind. But actually I could only achieve what I have in the writing sphere because of skills I'd picked up in the previous job or career. So often you can only really able to achieve something significant having gone through several jobs, careers, etc. So again, don't sort of beat yourself up about, apparent dead ends, cul-de-sacs, failed experiences that you've taken. Actually, when you look at a lot of successful people in history, they were the building blocks for what was to come.
Yeah, well, Henry Ford didn't start the Ford Motor Company until he was 40, which is one example.
Yeah, absolutely. And the statistic at the moment is actually people think startups for everyone in their early 20s, but the most successful startups at the moment come from people in their 40s, 50s, etc. because they've got this greater life experience, which they will need to get them over the inevitable obstacles.
Yeah. And one of the other quotes in the book says the formula for success today is to combine the magic of thinking big with the power of thinking long. So thinking big, but also thinking long in, as you said, 20 years, 30 years time frames. That's the way to do it. A lot of people don't think big because they think they have to achieve things in 1, 2, 3, or 5 years. But as you said, it does take 10 to 20 years before you get going.
Yeah, and the magic of thinking big is a popular self-help classic. So that's where I got that idea from. But in that book, there's very little about the time it takes to achieve things. So that's why I thought, combine that with the power of thinking long, and success becomes inevitable, in my view. It is like an equation. As long as you give yourself enough time and, are willing to go over obstacles, there's no way that you can't be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, in the book, you've got things like genius is patience, and a good quote by Thomas Edison, who famously said, genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, but is less often recorded is the rest of Edison's statement. According a genius is often merely a talented person who has done all his or her homework. So you've got to do the homework, you've got to do the study, you've got to fail before moving forward. 3 steps back, 5 steps forward. Time. So the book is basically all about time, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah, and one last thing I'd add to that is that try and do some work or job or pastime career which puts you into the flow state, where time seems to stop still. So by doing that, you'll get totally into whatever you're doing, into the process, instead of thinking about the results or the outcome. But it just means that whatever you're doing, you are totally enjoying it because you're in the state of flow, and the results will take care of themselves. So there's a macro thing of thinking about time in terms of decades, and then also the micro of doing work where you're so into it that time seems to stop still.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me a little bit. Let's take a segue down to the Capstone Classics series. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's these books. Some people might be familiar with the sort of look at them, look or feel. The idea behind them was that there are so many like older classic books from a few decades ago or 100 years ago or going back to ancient times. And I just thought people weren't reading them because they seem sort of old and fusty and too difficult. So the publisher, Wiley Capstone, and I had this idea to repackage them in very attractive covers, update the text, give them new, interesting introductions, which put the book into context for the modern reader. So, we did like Machiavelli's The Prince, Marcus Aurelius' The Meditations, but we also did, I got the original version of Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, and Wallace Wattles' Think and Grow Rich, some of these older prosperity classics. And we also repackaged them, for today's audience. So everything I do is really about taking existing ideas and bringing them to a new audience who wouldn't have known about them before. So, the Capstone Classics series is just a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. And I love a little interesting fact I found out when doing some research on yourself. I myself used to live in London, and I've got family up in Norwich, and I did spend a lot of time myself in libraries, going from one library to another. But you have a special little place in Oxford and a special little library where you do most of your research, and I'd love to talk a little bit about, is it called the Bodleian Library? Is that how you pronounce it?
Bodleian, yeah. It was started by Thomas
Bodleian,
Bodley.
yes,
So,
yes.
Yeah, so it's part of the University of Oxford, but you can get a pass to it, if you're researching something. So I literally spent years in that place, writing some of my books, because there's a rule of silence. It's incredibly conducive to working. You're surrounded by all these wood-paneled rooms with busts of famous scholars and old books and stuff. So, people say sometimes it's hard to work at home. So I get that. So if you can find a place to work like that, it can be an incredible sort of boost to getting things done.
And how many hours a day would you be in the library researching and doing your work?
Well, sort of 9 to 5, and sometimes a bit later. I mean, now I have an office at home, and because of the pandemic, I had to stop going to the Bodleian, and I was working in London as well.
Yeah.
But it's be all. I love. I'm with you there. I totally love libraries. Wherever I go, I try to seek out, the best one in the city or the town, because they often sort of carry a place's soul. The British Library in London, Mitchell Library in Sydney, incredible place. The one in Melbourne. So yeah, I love to celebrate libraries when I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And after the Capstone series in 2013, you released your another 50 philosophy classics. So another take on a heavy subject. What was that like researching that and plowing through those books?
That was amazing. I think of all the books I've done, that was my steepest learning curve. I've never actually studied philosophy before. So, going from everything from, Aristotle to Noam Chomsky and everything in between, was amazing reading all these classic books and then uh, summarizing it, analyzing, etc. So I'm very glad I did that book. Um, and then I had a bit of a change, in that I went back to doing the sort of econ business area. So I did the 50 economics classics and then the business classics, also, which
And
have
you had
done
you had
well.
the politics. You had the politics in 2016, which would have been easy for you with your studies of politics back in the day.
Yeah, that was one of the easier ones I've done. So with this series, we've gone from these sort of personal development, self-help, success type genres to the more classic genres, philosophy, politics, economics. Um, so yeah, it has become more. I've become more interested in the hard topics, and what I found is these books keep on being popular year after year because no one's ever going. They're not faddish topics. People are always going to be interested in these areas. So I'm glad that I've been able to shed some light for the general reader, in these subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of see you as a modern day Napoleon Hill, but slash between a Robert Greene. I actually think you're bigger and better than Robert Greene in terms of the research and depth you've done. And no disrespect to Robert Greene, I'll have him on the show one day. But yeah, I think the amount of books and research that you've actually put into really hard, difficult subjects is fantastic. How many books have you read in the last 20 years, roughly?
God, I mean that series alone, um, that was sort of minimum 500, plus doing a lot of other research around it, and then all the Capstone Classics. So yeah, probably be at least 750, I'd say. I've
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean
that's a huge number.
I've written over 1 million words, so I love the craft of writing itself and editing. So
Yeah.
I always say to people who are seeking writing advice, just read more. Read a massive amount, um, and you will start to work out, what is a good book, what's average, what's mediocre, what's good writing, what isn't. And also by studying other people first and, taking notes, etc., at first you're not going to be in any way original. You're just going to be really rehashing ideas you've already got in your head. But over time, you will start to see gaps in the literature or ideas. And so then you'll slowly percolating to the top, you'll develop some original ideas, which takes years and a lot of work and so on. So if you're a budding writer, just read an awful lot and write a lot, even if you don't think it's good quality. Read and write. It's that simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's your process? So do you type or do you old school pen and paper when you sort of do your books? What's your process like in terms of taking notes than actually writing?
Always typing. So if I'm going through a book, I'll just be reading it in real time. I don't read a book and then a few days later go up and write notes, because you always lose a ton of stuff. You've got to do it in real time. So if you're studying a book or summarizing it, have it in front of you, like on a stand. So each chapter you're going through, you're taking notes as you do it. And then the key to writing a good analysis or summary is great notes. If you've got really good notes in the first place, it's much easier to write it up at the end. And then in terms of the actual time, I get all my best stuff done first thing in the morning. So try to get everything done as possible before lunchtime, when your mind is fresher, and then leave the rest of the day to doing more, admin things.
Yeah. What about, are you a coffee man or a tea man?
Coffee is a bit too strong for me, so I just have usually a cup of tea or something. But caffeine is very useful for getting you into the zone, into the state of flow. Having that sort of zoom focus on what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And what topics are you thinking about for the next sort of 50 series classic? So any genres or things or any books you're working on at the moment that is coming out shortly?
Well, there will be other books in that series, but what I've done working on the last year or so is we're developing a new knowledge platform called Memode. So I'm managing the whole content side of this app and platform. I can give you the link at the end, so you can put it in your show notes. But it's basically taking the ideas that I've had with the whole 50 Classic series of making existing knowledge, disseminating it, but making it more succinct. So we will take a book and put it into like 10 or 20 points, only like bullet points. So instead of like a chapter written in regular prose, we've got these very succinct, dual like 20 points on a book or a topic. So it's taken the 50 Classic series to an extreme, because one feature you would know from the book, I have this one-line summary of my longer summaries, which is in a nutshell. So it's the summary of the summary. So I wanted to do this thing. I wanted to do it online, so get beyond physical books, ebooks, etc., and actually create a platform and an app that people can use on their phones, on their computers. So we're still sort of very much at the beta release stage, but it's basically taking everything I've learned in all my writing and the whole method of summary and analysis, but putting it online so that other people contribute their own content in a similar way.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of your famous quotes here I've got written down is, what drives yourself is the idea that at some point in the future, the average person will possess much more knowledge than what is capable now. But the possession of knowledge on its own doesn't automatically translate into success. But what it does do, it provides more references against which to check new information. So Yeah, I agree with you regarding summarising the summary. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I look, knowledge on its own or information is one thing, knowledge is another thing, and wisdom is something else again. But um, you have to make use of existing information in a better way before it becomes knowledge. And then when you have knowledge, the more knowledge you get, the more you want. You realize what you don't know, and then over time the brain naturally sees themes and commonalities in your knowledge, and that is the beginning of wisdom. So an analogy would be, some people say, well, you should focus on your spiritual life, say, and forget about money. But actually it tends to be the reverse. If you achieve some level of sort of financial comfort or independence, then, the old hierarchy of needs, Maslow's pyramid, you move on to the next level and you think, oh, well, now I've got that. I want to learn more or get more education, or I want more spiritual development. So you go up and up this pyramid. So that's how I see information, knowledge, and wisdom. That it's very much in an order like that that you begin with and go upwards.
yeah, perfect. And I guess I've just got one more last question before we wrap up. This one's sort of a bit of left field, but you're from the UK, so you understand the TV show Come Dine With Me. Now, if you was to host a dinner party and invite three people from the past or present, who would they be, and what would you serve them?
Jeez. Yeah, look, I think it would be quite a few philosophers. I get someone like Socrates at the table, um, from ancient times. I'd get some sort of mid-century philosophers like uh, Jean-Paul Sartre, or Heidegger, and I would have, because I'm now very much into technology, online startups, I would invite Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin. No one knows who the hell he is, or she is, or they are. So that would be the sort of surprise guest that I'd have along.
Very interesting dinner party.
In terms of what I'd serve them, I think a basic Mediterranean diet that Socrates would be used to. Lots of grapes, olive oil, bread, red wine, simple things like that.
It'd be a late night and great conversation with a couple of drinks as well. But no, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on the show. And if everyone can you can access the 50 classic books in audio format from Audible, paperback, and Kindle format as well. Where can people find you online, and where can people find your books as well?
Yeah, if you just Google Tom Butler-Bowdon, my website will come up. Number one, which has got actually quite a lot of free content on there, some of the summaries from my books, and then you'll also see all the Amazon links, Audible, etc., wherever you want to buy the books, including the Capstone series. And then, Michael, I'll also give you a link to this new knowledge platform, so if people want to check that out, they can as well. I also
Yeah, perfect. I'll share that with my audience. And
I also have a podcast similar to yours. We cover called Book Insights, where we cover a different non-classic book each week. So I'll give you the link for that too.
what's the podcast show name?
It's called Book Insights.
Oh, Book Insights. Okay, perfect. And before you go, what's the last message you want to leave? What's one message you would give to the audience listening?
Yeah, it's never any waste to spend money or time working on yourself. a lot of people, Warren Buffett has said the same thing. Obviously, have a career plan, what you want to achieve in 5, 10 years or whatever. But keep educating yourself, both in terms of personal development, trying to improve your sort of self-help, success, relationship skills, but then also educate yourself about, hard topics, science, philosophy, psychology, stuff like that. So whatever you are into in terms of books, always try to sort of raise the bar a bit. Tackle difficult books. They're very much worth it, and you will get some bragging rights too at parties.
Perfect. Well, Tom, thanks for being a guest on the Best Book Bits podcast, and I look forward to your next book. So, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Butler-Bowdon, have a great rest of the day, and speak to you soon. See you later.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right. Thanks. See you.